2005's The New World is the fifth movie from the famously reclusive filmmaker Terrence Malick. Set in the very first years of the 17th century, The New World depicts the founding of the first successful English colony in America, with a particular emphasis upon the intermingled experiences of John Smith and the ever-mysterious Pocahontas, something that we'll get to later. But first, let's talk about the actual film, and then we can get into discussion about the events it depicts and whether or not they are in any way accurate. As a film, The New World really is a tour de force. It is spectacularly beautiful, with incredible cinematography throughout, well thought out performances, sparse but effective use of dialogue, and for the most part, an engaging narrative on which it can hang its hat. In terms of performance, Colin Farrell gives one of his career bests, whilst newcomer Corinne Kilcher gives what is easily the best performance of Pocahontas that I have ever seen. That said, this film isn't one of the easiest or most enjoyable to follow for those who don't appreciate abstract storytelling in the medium. With voiceovers so abstract and vague that they border upon the obnoxious, a gargantuan running time, and a refusal even to name Pocahontas, this is a film for those with plenty of time and patience. But, if you are prepared to stick with it, The New World very well could be one of your favourite movies of the 2010s. The problem, if we can call it that, with films which depict historic events is whether or not they are quote-unquote historically accurate. This is a question I am asked all the time when it comes to films based on historic events, and it's something that has given me a lot of pause for thought in the past. What does it mean to have a historically accurate movie? Do movies have to be historically accurate? Do filmmakers have a responsibility to make accurate historic dramas in the same way that historians have an ethical responsibility to describe the past based upon evidence and sound analysis? Does it really matter if a film is historically inaccurate? Trust me, for a historian, these are not redundant questions, and whether most viewers realise it or not, they're not redundant for the audience either. You see, history is not the kind of thing most people think about most of the time, but it is something that almost everybody spends at least some time thinking about over the course of their lifetime, be it the history of the country where they live, their family history, the history of the world wars perhaps, or just one's own personal history. The issue, at least as it appears to me, is that movies, and sometimes television shows and even video games, work as the historian for the wider public consciousness. Now, this isn't necessarily the fault of the film industry or the audiences who consume history through these mediums, but it is an issue when a significant number of people believe that, say, Braveheart, for example, is a historically accurate film. Most frustratingly for those who work in the field of history, no amount of criticism can stop at least some of the audience, often a majority, or so it appears, from believing that a given film is an accurate depiction of the past. In truth, however, no film can ever truly be historically accurate, and this is something which applies as much to The New World as it does to something like Braveheart. Historical accuracy in films does not, nor can it, exist. You see, when most people ask if a movie is historically accurate, what they are generally asking is whether the events depicted in the film happened, or whether they happened in broadly the same way as was depicted on screen. But history is a very difficult beast to tame, and though it's usually tempting to think of the past in terms of a grand story, a grand narrative, which can be captured and represented on screen, the truth of the matter is far, far more complex than that. In The New World, for instance, we have a film which is ostensibly about the establishment of the first English colony in the early 1600s, and yet in an early portion of the movie, the total legacy of America's murky and muddy Indian heritage is laid bare in one of the least subtle scenes the film has to offer. During a meeting between Powhatan and his advisors, one of those present predicts, in a nutshell, the ultimate fate of the colonial project, the displacement of the tribes by an aggressively expanding group of European interlopers. Now, this isn't a bad scene in and of itself, but it does serve as a reminder that the makers of this movie had to contend with one of the biggest black spots in American history as they developed this film. Or to put it another way, a film set between 1607 and 1617 bears at least some of the weight accumulated during the subsequent 400 years of Native American history. Again, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that the film isn't just about the period, which it purports to cover directly. The point I am making is that whatever historic film one is talking about, there are often issues, controversies and perspectives that it cannot avoid, or in some cases, cannot engage with due to the events which have occurred between the original time being depicted and the time during which it was made. In short, historic films often tell us more about the time when they were made than they do about the time they depict. Labeling a movie as historically accurate tends to be a good marketing tool for the film industry, but even when filmmakers genuinely strive for historical accuracy, the audience is treated to something that has necessarily been reshaped for entertainment, has necessarily been reshaped to suit modern sensibilities, and necessarily been reshaped to suit the industry which created it. All that being said, The New World remains an important, and in my mind, brilliant film, so long as one understands and remembers that the events depicted on the screen reflect Malick's vision of the period, rather than an accurate, objective depiction of what really happened. True, the use of sign language, often silent with ballet-like motions, is incredibly beautiful, but it was likely far less elegant and more cumbersome at the time. True, the filmmakers went to great lengths in order to ensure that various props, costumes, and even language patterns were as authentic as possible. But all of that authenticity is used to surround a love story that probably never happened. Historical accuracy is not something that we could really apply to the New World then. But that being said, historical accuracy as a label cannot be applied to any other film either. That, however, should not take away from the film which Malick has created. A poignant, haunting, and beautiful film, with the occasional shot of historical authenticity, if not historical accuracy.